I feel like Jerry Seinfeld. I can't do a joke without smiling and ruining it. Sometimes it's just so hard having all these controversial anti-Trump beliefs. No, I did it again. Okay, I'm gonna try to make this quick. I want to say just a few things about power and privilege. So I study something called process work, which is the shit, by the way. If you ever want to check it out, process work or process-oriented psychology. And in this modality, we use the language of rank to talk about power and privilege. And it's cool to use the word rank because it reminds me that power is always relational. It's always in relationship to something. And there's something about the word rank that implies relationship. And it's cool. We actually differentiate amongst 4 different kinds of rank. So there's social rank, which is what we normally think of when we talk about privilege, right? So if you have high social rank, you might be a straight white male. And if you have low social rank, these are kind of the isms. You might be a woman or queer or disabled or a person of color or have mental health stuff going on. There's a lot of different categories of human beings that our society systematically and interpersonally oppresses, which then becomes painfully internalized in a bunch of really fucked up ways. But we also talk about 3 other kinds of rank. One is contextual. So this is like a boss and an employee, or a teacher and a student. Then there is psychological rank. So this is something that comes from just a general feeling of confidence and belief in yourself. And that's when we get into that mysterious question of nature versus nurture. Like, there really are some people who are just born with a personality that makes it easier for them to feel like they can speak up. And then all of these ranks kind of interface with each other. So it's very possible that if you have high social rank, you've probably been encouraged to speak up and be more confident. And what we even perceive as high psychological rank is determined by the cultural context and society that we find ourselves in. So in the United States, where I live, it's really highly prized if you can be loud and initiate and kind of take a stand and speak up. So someone who can do that is someone who has high social rank. And then someone who might naturally be more quiet and more introverted and more feeling, because of the society that they're in, might develop a lower psychological rank because they're not in line with what their society values, which is very different than if you grew up in a place like Japan, which has a very sentient way of being, even in social situations. So in Japan, if you're quiet, but when you speak softly and with wisdom, and if you have a natural ability at this, you might develop a high psychological rank because of the values of your society. Another example of the relationship between social, contextual, and psychological rank would be if you're in a heterosexual relationship. The man might feel more comfortable being loud and domineering, and this might give him a high psychological rank in the relationship. Whereas if you're a woman and you've been socialized to be a little bit more submissive and passive and adapt your behavior to the person that you're with, if you're with a man like that, you might find yourself experiencing low psychological rank. So signals of the fact that you might be feeling low psychological rank, and I'm sorry for using this language over and over again, but I find it so useful, is if you find yourself practicing what you're going to say before you say it, which is something I found myself doing a lot in some of the relationships I've been in, especially when it comes time for me to do something that might be outside of what I've been socialized to believe is acceptable, attractive, or even lovable for a woman. And then there's this 4th kind of rank, which they call spiritual rank, which might come from genuinely being connected to spirit, and could also be from being connected to anything larger than yourself. So even if you feel like you have the moral high ground in a situation, if you feel like what you're standing for in the moment is righteous, if you feel like you're connected to a movement or something that is important and beyond yourself. In the moment, you can have a high spiritual rank, or maybe even be able to anchor through a walk in the world, being connected to this power. And the other thing is that these are constantly shifting. They're moment to moment. And especially because of the dynamic interplay between them, we all have complex patternings of high and low ranks. And the thing about this is that we're much more aware of the places where we have low rank as opposed to the places where we have high rank. So let's say even if you're born a white straight man, but you were born poor, that's what you identify with, is the fact that you have struggled in your life around issues of class. Or let's say that you might be a white straight male, but then you feel rejected by a woman, and that's painful to you. It's much easier for us to be aware of the places where we're hurt, oppressed, victimized, and feel powerless and hurt by other people's power than to be aware of the places where we do have power. You know, one really potent example for me about how people identify with their low rank even when they have really high rank is Palestine and Israel, and Jewish people who've gone through, you know, centuries and millennia of persecution and trauma and now have intergenerational trauma. That's what they identify with. So much so that they don't see ways in which they have power in this current situation in Israel and Palestine, and instead think that Arabs are trying to push them into the sea, and they're this small, powerless country surrounded by hostile, powerful Arab countries, and they don't understand the way that they have one of the most powerful militaries in the world, backed by the most powerful militaries in the world, and are perpetuating essentially apartheid and genocide on a group of people. And those Palestinians that are being just like destroyed on a daily basis don't see the ways in which they also have power and resilience, in which they have this entire population of Israelis terrified of their power and potential acts of terrorism. And this is another side of the fact that a lot of the actions that we do and a lot of the reasons why we can't see our high rank come from trauma, and that actually a lot of what it means to experience low rank situations means that you've incurred different levels of trauma in your life that then make you that much more protective, that make you that much more fiercely cling to the high rank that you do have, because you're so afraid of losing it and you think it's all you got. You know, this might even explain why your boss is being a dick, is because he feels I automatically made him a he, that's funny. But yeah, why bosses might be dicks is because they because of their high rank feel like it's inherently threatened and don't want to lose it. And maybe that's part of what we're seeing in the world right now. And part of this is because privilege, power, rank, whatever you want to call it, is almost like a drug. The more you have of it, the less you're aware of it, right? Like as a white person, I am so painfully unaware of my white privilege. And it takes tremendous effort, like a daily exertion of my own choice to try to become aware of both the systemic ways that the social structures are systematically oppressing people of color, of the way that this might show up in my interpersonal relationships, and of my own latent thoughts of superiority. You know, there's something about not going through that experience, which means I genuinely don't see it. I genuinely have these blind spots that I need to consciously make efforts to become more aware of. And the other thing that's weird about having really high rank is sometimes it can feel like a low rank. You know, like we laugh now about this idea of the white man's burden, and it's weird to think that those people those colonizers, those fucking imperialist assholes, genuinely believed in their superiority and genuinely believed that that superiority was a burden to them. You know, even Christian people having this high spiritual rank of feeling connected to God and Jesus feel like it's their responsibility to share that with other people. And maybe in a more relatable example, like if you're the boss of a huge company, that's a tremendous responsibility on your shoulders. So people might be looking at you like you have all this power, but you feel like you're this servant indebted to your employees. You actually experience your high position as having a servile and low power nature because of the burden that you carry within you. I think the other thing that we don't talk about as much is that when you go through an experience of oppression or of having prejudice lobbed against you or of any kind of difficulty in your life, sometimes it makes you stronger. You know, when you go through an experience of having low social rank, for example, it means that you actually have the opportunity to cultivate a psychological depth and a strength and to build something beautiful and to find value in something that society is telling you is less valuable. You know, like I think about queer culture and how queer people are excellent at creating family amongst their friends, at creating spaces of beauty and joy and sharing that becomes so desirable that then straight people actually want to come and take it from them. Or, you know, like people of color, right, who create these cultures of such like powerful energy and rich authenticity that comes from their struggle that then becomes appropriated in all these really disgusting ways by the mainstream. And you know, you go through something like some painful experience of oppression, it might mean that you do feel connected to something righteous, right? Like you are in this way on the right side of history, potentially, and do have the moral high ground in a certain way, so that it's almost this inverse relationship where the higher your social rank is, potentially that's not the place where you're going to cultivate spiritual or psychological strength. And the places where you do experience low rank, you're going to find something deep and profound and true and real about that experience that enhances and enriches you, and that I believe enhances and enriches all of us. Right now, I feel like we're at this really interesting moment in history, especially in the United States, where essentially disenfranchised white people are having the places where they do feel disempowered, probably around issues of class and issues around having their superiority challenged, are being mobilized towards hatred towards minority groups that comes from an conscious or unconscious feeling of entitlement that, you know, like disenfranchised white people, probably especially white males and heterosexual white males, do feel like they deserve to be on top. And the system that favors wealthy people has capitalized on this in order to make them feel like the problem is immigrants or uppity black people or you know, man-hating feminists, as opposed to a capitalist system of oppression that keeps people down in order to exploit them, exploit their labor, and exploit the money that they make in order to keep a very small handful of people in power. So you have all these disenfranchised white people who are being mobilized around the sense of superiority and power that they want to have for their high social rank, but it's harnessing the energy that they feel around places where they feel really low rank and powerless. And this is happening in at the same time that minority voices are feeling more and more empowered to come forward, and to come forward powerfully, and to call out rank unawareness, and to challenge these systems of oppression and interpersonal prejudice. And you know, it's this beautiful like unearthing of the internalized struggles that they go through. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's like, I don't understand why like black people are so angry. And I think really what he was saying is like he just didn't like that anger being projected at him. But maybe what he wasn't aware of is how just like awful it is to walk around with this internalized voice in your head telling you that you're less than, that you're ugly, that you are not as smart, that you have to be perfect, that you have to work 10 times as hard. And sometimes that comes out fighting the outside, where there's also a fight, and at the same time fighting what has become an internal fight against these voices. Which brings me to the thing that I want to talk about, because there's this way where it's really awesome that minority voices are feeling empowered to come forward and to challenge the systems that be. And that's happening in a lot of different ways that are so important, you know, like Black Lives Matter, and you know, like our queer allyship right now at this time in the world when in Chechnya gay people are being literally put into concentration camps, where they're being taken from their homes, and where the governments of places like Uganda and Poland are swearing to exterminate gay people. I mean, fascism is horrifically on the rise, and it's something that we all need to pay attention to and fight straight up. And minority voices are being powered in other ways, like the disabled persons movement, or like all of this stuff in alternative mental health. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, people were being put in mental institutions for being gay or for being different in any way, given electroshock treatment. Like their difference was not being accepted. And so this mobilization of minority voices is fucking fabulous, and I like breathe power into it and just like have faith and hope and pray for this world where one day maybe we do come to deal better with difference and diversity and make a world where we can fucking coexist, and where I don't think that your existence will engulf me or destroy me. So yes, more power to minority voices. And at the same time, because of the complex pattern of high and low rank that we all carry within us, there's this weird way in which these disenfranchised white people in the United States, or these fucking like alt-right people in France, and refugee haters, and just like all of that shit, in a way that's also coming from the tiny minority voice inside these people. It's coming from their high rank superiority that they're unaware of, and it's coming from their low rank wounding. And there's this other way in which, at the same time that we're calling out social power, maybe we're failing to really see and acknowledge high psychological and spiritual power. So there are some ways in which, when these minority voices are coming forward and trying to point out the unawareness of people who have a lot of privilege and power, they themselves are not being aware of their high psychological, and spiritual power in the moment. And so it can almost look abusive or attacking. And because it's coming out in ways that are unaware, maybe there's a way in which it is abusive or attacking. And if spiritual rank is unaware, it means they think they're righteous in abusing and attacking. And so I think what I want to say is like, yes to the anger, yes to the hurt, yes to the rage. And maybe there's a different way where we can become aware of the spiritual and psychological power in the moment that could actually be more empowering than perpetuating these cycles of abuse. Because we know that there's this really solid sort of geometry of the psyche between victim, abuser, protector, right? And these are fluid roles that anybody can fall into at any moment. So these people who feel kind of like systematically victimized by the abuser of the system can then become the abusers in the moment towards anything or anyone. And you can think that it's righteous, and maybe it is. And you know, I am a white person, and so I don't feel as comfortable speaking for people of color, but I can speak as a woman, you know, where I felt like a lot of the anger that I've had for men, especially when they do really fucked up things, where they abuse their power, like sexual assault or rape or domestic violence, or even just subtle ways of creating complexes of low self-esteem within women, or thinking that they are entitled, makes me so angry. And that I do think that that anger is valid, and I do think my calling it out when I see it is also valid. But I wonder for myself if I was able to become more aware of the feeling of power that comes from that sense of righteousness, and the feeling of power and intelligence, I think, that comes from being a woman and seeing these things that I think men literally don't see. Like, if I could somehow become aware of that strength within me, that I might be able to use it differently and in a way that doesn't protect this cycle. Because, you know, I grew up in this really activist environment, and I saw like a lot of rage from, you know, women and lesbians and poor people and people of color towards the man. And you know, there was this way where I even sometimes felt myself go into that protector role, where I wanted to protect them from this brilliant, articulate, intelligent, fucking powerful attack that was coming towards these high-ranked people who were kind of blindsided, who had no knowledge of like how to respond, and so responded by shutting down the conversation. Because that's the other thing about power and privilege and rank, is you can choose to walk away, and you can tone police people and say, I'll only talk to you if you're calm. You can like, if you're the boss, you can just like shut down that feedback and threaten people with fucking you know, firing them, or the threat of firing them. Or, you know, as a white person, you can just like tune out. Or as a man, let's say if some woman is raging at you, you can think that she is the problem, and it can reinforce your sense of entitlement and the fact that women are hysterical and emotional and do need to be controlled by logic, rationality. And you can feel the need inside yourself to protect, which in turn perpetuates these systems of abuse and oppression, and which perpetuates this whole cycle over and over again. So I think really what I'm trying to say is minority people are fucking powerful, are really strong, and have the strength to change the world. And the other side of this that comes up is, you know, in process work, we facilitate a lot of conversations between people on different sides of rank and encourage this dialogue, because I think the other side of understanding that rank is relational means that the healing has to happen in relationship. And the outcome of a lot of these conversations is low rank people will say to high rank people, like, you need to go educate yourself. Like, as a white person who tries to work on racism within me and racism in the world, I've gotten that a lot from people of color, where it's like, you need to go work on yourself. And I've felt that towards men and towards straight people. It's like, dude, you need to go work on yourself and become more aware, man, and educate yourself about these systems that exist, and notice when it's happening within you. Notice when you're like transgressing a woman's boundaries without consent, for example, or when you're using the power that you have over someone else. And I think that's really true. You know, there's this idea of like emotional labor, where if you are in a low rank position, like, you need to fucking emotionally do the labor for people. Like, you need to, one, like, receive the violence. You need to take it in yourself. You need to like heal and transmute in yourself. And then you're constantly like gauging the higher rank person to see like how you can educate them and how you can hold them in their wounding and how you can like facilitate their journey towards self-understanding and relationship understanding. You know, like, as a woman, I feel like I have like emotionally labored with every boyfriend I've ever had, and with a lot of my male friends too, to help them become more aware of sexism. And my pay for that has been like a potentially slightly more aware man in the world, or a, you know, slightly better partner for me, who maybe in small ways more understands and sees the struggles that I go through. And so I really get why a low-ranked person would tell a high-ranked person, like, dude, you need to go educate yourself. Or if I'm going to be doing all of this labor, fucking pay me. You know, like, you want me to teach a class about, like, the complexities of consent? Like, fucking pay me. Like, if I want, like, a, you know, like, person of color to come and tell me about their experience and tell me about racism, like, I want to fucking pay them for their time, especially because I know there's so much that they are doing that they're not being paid for. And it just comes from these like bullshit systems that we somehow inherited. But the thing is, there's only so much that a high-ranked person can do to educate themselves. There's only so much you can learn from fucking Google, right? Because a lot of these things happen in relationship and happen subtly, and a lot of these things happen in ways we can't see, right? Like, that's part of having rank, is you don't see it. Like, I will always need like a disabled person to explain to me the aspects of why it's difficult for them to move through the world that I genuinely, actually don't know and can't see and have a hard time understanding. You know, there's this really famous, like, one of the first women who in the social theory world tried to bring understanding to these aspects of racism that we don't see, talked about the color of Band-Aids, you know, and is about how, like, white people, we have Band-Aids that match our skin tone, and people of color can't find Band-Aids that match their fucking skin tone. And that is something that I would never know to educate myself about, you know. And it was only through someone pointing it out to her and her writing this article about it that I was able to read, that I learned about it. And so it's almost inherent to the rank dynamic that there's this aspect of needing to educate higher rank people that is always going to be there. It is always going to be there, no matter how much high rank people educate themselves. And this is the place where, when it happens in relationship, lower rank people have the opportunity to come into the moment and realize their power in the moment and use it with consciousness to think about building sustainable relationships moving forward. So yes to the anger, yes to the hurt, yes to the personal empowerment process that can come from connecting to that power and feeling that power and fucking using it however it comes out in the moment. And yes, also to becoming aware of that power and thinking about how we can use it consciously to build sustainable relationships and to maybe encourage dialogue and understand that the actions that we're doing now are moving forward towards that world where hopefully no one has power over, where we are able to coexist in our difference and diversity. And when I step into this in a way that's not silencing myself, in a way that's not, because that happens too, right? Like if I overthink about trying to protect, like a man, for example, if I overthink about how to hold him and his wounding and hurt of like being hurt by women in the past or something like that, it could walk that razor's edge between like being conscious and in relationship or silencing myself and not being true, right? So it's a balance of how to be true and honest and to bring the other person into the awareness that I have of a low rank person, of how their high rank plays out in relationship and in the world and affects them. And also helps me see them in their wholeness, right? Also helps me see the places where they identify with their low rank and where they have experienced this strange kind of issues that come with having high rank. Yeah, that's what I want to say. That there's so many different kinds of power, and that we're tremendously more powerful than we know. And that because of this highly polarized time in history, it's that much more important to become aware of our power and think about how we can use it well. And how the way that we use it is planting the seeds of the potential future and hopefully of this beautiful world that we know in our hearts is possible. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Happy spring, happy summer to some of you, and so much love.